Here we are. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to welcome all of you. It's the first time for me being here at this conference, and it's a pleasure. As it was just announced, I'm Michael Weiss from the University of Southeastern Norway. My background is philosophy and philosophical practice, and I'm working at the Institute for Pedagogy. So it's not so much psychology, but pedagogy, the field that I'm working in. I will do an introduction about the Trilogos method, because this presentation I'm doing on behalf of the Trilogos Foundation. And after this presentation, it will be Professor Sherman Weber, who will have a look from a more psychological perspective on this method. I will first share a presentation now, a poster series. I will present the so-called Trilogos method by means of this poster exhibition. You don't have to read all what it's written there because it's quite a lot, and I will try to speak more freely about the essence of each poster here. As you can see, the topic on the first poster is inner growth, and when we have a look at inner growth, then we have to say that this was already a topic in ancient Greece with the old philosophers. And in fact, inner growth was the main goal of philosophy. It meant a development process to develop towards wisdom. And it is in fact this inner growth or this development towards wisdom or inner wisdom, which is also the goal of the Trilogos method, which was developed by Linda Vera Röttlisberger, who I also would like to welcome here today to this conference. Now, a central aspect in antiquity was paideia, which is the original term of pedagogy. And what it meant was to become the best version of oneself, to unfold one's human potentials. And that's also the goal of the Trilogos method. And here you can see the title of the exhibition here, In Touch with Your Inner Voice. And the inner voice was actually a term that was already used by Socrates in terms of the daimonion, which is a kind of inner faculty that guided Socrates in his actions. And he thought it to be transcendent and of spiritual character. And in fact, the spiritual dimension is a key aspect in the Trilogos method, as we will see during this presentation now. As I've said, the goal of the Trilogos method is to unfold human potential. And to some of you, the term human potential or the so-called human potential movement from the 1960s might be familiar. One of the representatives is in fact Maslow with his hierarchy of needs. And on the top of his pyramid of the hierarchy of needs, you can see the self-fulfillment needs. And instead of needs, we rather speak of intelligence as a potential in the Trilogos method. And there are basically three core or key potentials or key intelligences. And the first one is the IQ, our capability to think rationally. Then we have the EQ, emotional intelligence, could also call it our ability to feel and to respond to feelings of others in a responsible and reflected way. And then finally, we have what is called SQ, which is the spiritual intelligence. And that form of intelligence might be new or unfamiliar to some of you. It is actually our ability to believe and to trust in something. Those of you who have heard of Viktor Frankl and his approach to meaning, in this respect, we could say that spiritual intelligence is our capability of generating meaning, finally, ultimate meaning. All these three abilities together form the so-called PsyQ, which means that IQ, EQ, and SQ are interconnected and they form what is here called PsyQ, or the human potential, which is quite similar, or it can be related to what Antonovsky called the sense of coherence. And I would like to give you a practical example so that you can almost experience this psyche. And that is the following. Just imagine that you are holding a lemon in your left hand. For this exercise, you can also close your eyes if you like. And while imagining that you're holding a lemon in your left hand, you can almost sense its weight weighing in your hand. And maybe you can also sense the skin of the lemon and also its refreshing smell and its color. And then you imagine to take a knife with your right hand and carefully you cut out a slice from the lemon. Put the knife aside. Then you take the slice of the lemon and you bite into it. Now, when doing that little experiment, it could easily be, if you just did it now, that you felt the cold shiver running down your spine, or that you almost could taste the sour taste of the lemon. And that is very interesting, that you could feel this cold shiver or taste the taste of the lemon, because there was never a lemon here. So for a moment, you more or less believed in the existence of this lemon. And because you believed in it, you could feel the cold shiver running down your spine. You could taste the taste of the lemon. But then finally now, of course, we all realized that there was no lemon, and that there is a difference between imagination and reality here. So in this experiment, we used our AQ, the emotional intelligence, in terms of what we felt, our SQ in terms of what we believed, and our EQ in terms of what we thought and how we could differentiate and distinguish between imagination and that there is in fact no lemon here. So here in this experiment, we used all three different forms of intelligence at the same time. They were interconnected. And now the question is what we can do with this psyche, with these interconnected forms of intelligence. And some of you might even wonder, why is there three forms of intelligence? Howard Gardner, for example, he spoke of multiple intelligences. I would like to leave the question open for now and just continue to the next poster. As you can see, you used in this experiment your imagination, you imagined the lemon, but also your intuition, because intuitively a certain lemon came to your mind. And it can be that the lemon was fully yellow, a bright yellow. It can be that the lemon was a bit green on the skin still, and so on. So you also used what could be called your source of inspiration. You were inspired by a very particular lemon. And if we all, and I see that we are 68 participants now here in this room, if we all would describe our lemon, then we would see that we have 68 different lemons. And the next question then is, with this individual lemon of ours, we could ask, what does it have to do with me? For example, a green lemon, green on the skin, what does it tell me? And here you start with free associations. For example, you could associate maturity, something that still wants to come to full fruition, and so on. So here we are using the technique of free association. And what has to be said about this technique of free association and the Trilogos method in general is that we are using imagination, intuition, and inspiration in the so-called guided imageries that form the core, the center of this method. And there is also a full course, an autodidactical course that you can do with altogether 64 guided imageries. And in these 64 guided imageries, these three core capabilities, these perception skills of imagination and intuition, are at the center. Now, what is the purpose of these guided imageries? And here you have what is called the symbolic language, and I already said a bit about that. The subtitle here reads, the most important foreign language in the world. And that does not come from Linda Röttlisberger, nor from anyone else of the Trilogos Foundation. This is a quote from Erich Fromm, the psychologist Erich Fromm. And what did he mean? When we ask, what could my lemon have to do with me? What does the green of the lemon or the yellow of the lemon, the size of the lemon, what do I associate with it? If I start to ask these questions, this is very similar to so-called dream interpretation. And for example, as you see here on the chart, on the poster, if it wouldn't be a lemon, it could also be a rose that you imagined. And the rose had red blossoms, then you would associate love. If it had thorns, you would associate maybe protection, defense. If it had a closed bud, you could associate something that has yet to thrive and bloom. So here you start to associate, on the one hand, to the specific symbol that you imagined. On the other hand, you're also asking, what does this symbol have to do with me? And here we are at what is commonly known as dream interpretation, and dream interpretation existed, well, probably ever since and in all cultures. And here you can also read that dreams are like messengers of your inner voice. And the purpose of these guided imageries that the Trilogos method offers is nothing else than to go into certain guided dreams and using that experiences in order to make associations about it and see how could they eventually relate to me and my everyday life. So, and here you're doing what could be called self-reflection. When you ask, what does it have to do with me? Then you're doing self-reflection. Know thyself, as Socrates once said. Now, up until now, probably some of you might think that this is more or less like traditional approaches to dream interpretation, traditional psychotherapeutic approaches to dream interpretation, but there is a main difference between the Trilogos method and to other more conventional approaches of psychotherapy. And this main difference is basically the understanding of the unconscious. In the context of the Trilogos method, dreams are not just an expression of individual unconscious, not just an expression of repressed desires and feelings, but they can also be an expression of spiritual experiences. For example, you dream about having a conversation with your dead grandfather. You dream about taking contact with an old friend living in the US, and you phone him the next day after you wake up, and all of a sudden you realize it was important to call that friend. So these are spiritual experiences which might remind some of you of parapsychology, and indeed I would agree. But the question is, the spiritual dimension, has it never played a role in certain approaches of psychotherapy? And of course it had. For example, Viktor Frankl coined the term spiritual unconscious, or C.G. Jung spoke of the collective unconscious. And these are more or less concepts to explain and organize such spiritual and transpersonal experiences into a meaningful whole. Some of you might have heard of transpersonal psychotherapy, and this is a pretty similar direction that the Trilogos method has chosen by integrating the spiritual dimension into the intervention process. However, and that is important, and here is also the difference to what we normally know by parapsychology. The difference is that the goal here is not, when investigating such spiritual experiences, the goal here is not to give proof of such spiritual dimensions. The point rather is, how can such spiritual experiences be used in order to ask yourself, what might they have to do with me and my everyday life? What can I learn from them? Because this question appears to be essential for personal development. And as I have said, we find a similar approach also in so-called transpersonal psychotherapy. Now, when we understand our dreams or our experiences from so-called guided imageries as more or less symbolic messages, or we could also say dreams are like mirror images of the soul, and you can recognize yourself in them, then we could look at our everyday life in the same way. That means we could look at our life from a more symbolic perspective. So you could ask yourself, what does the struggles that I have almost every day with my boss at work, what do they tell me about me? What do they tell me about my attitudes, my values in life, my behavior? So here you are reflecting yourself in your everyday life. And when we go further with that, then by posing these questions and having this symbolic perspective on our everyday life, we can also speak of a meaningful tool for personal growth. And here it's, well, you could put it like this. Whatever it is that a guided imagery and the experience of a guided imagery or a dream is revealing to you, it relates to you and your everyday life. That means you're trying to make use of that. You're using it as a tool for personal growth. And here meaning becomes a quite powerful driving force in terms of how you can change yourself, how you can work on yourself. So a meaningful tool here is meant also in the sense of meaning as a tool for personal growth. Because if you ask such questions, you can learn to develop your human potential towards human competence. This is the main point here. But it's not only about personality development, it's also about what is called consciousness formation. Because by embarking on such a search for meaning, we are not only developing our personality, but we are also forming our consciousness and shaping our awareness, metaphorically speaking, like the rings of a tree. And consciousness will grow like the annual rings of a tree. We get a different, not only attitude towards, for example, the situation with our boss, but it can also be that we get a different awareness, a different consciousness towards that situation. In that sense, we could speak of our life, everyday life, as a school, the world as a schoolhouse, or in other words, life itself as the curriculum. This approach to life is not so new. It was already used, or it's a very similar approach to what we know from the Stoics, that whatever happens in your life, it's nothing else than a lesson. And that, of course, also means that the learning process, if we understand life as the curriculum, then the learning process is different from person to person, because we all make different experiences. And here we can speak of what C.G. Jung called individuation. That means we are starting to develop ourselves in individual ways. But it's not only done with individuation. A very important point here is that the insights that you make on the way, for example, by means of the guided imageries of the Trilogos method, you're gaining insights, and then after having these insights, it's also about integrating them, starting to practice them. Because if you don't do that, there is no point in gaining a lot of insight about yourself and life if you don't start to integrate that, if you don't start to practice them. And finally, it is when you start to integrate these insights, it is using your potentials for the best of all in very simple and short terms. So here we can speak of so-called cooperation, as you can see here. And when it's about using your potential for the best of all, then we come to a topic which was already known, or which is known already from Aristotle. Aristotle said the highest goal in life is happiness, is the good life, and this highest goal all human beings have in common. But we all have a different understanding, a different idea of what happiness or the good life is about. Nevertheless, when we speak of cooperation, then we could also say here it's about happiness or the good life for all. And this is what you could say is the final stage of individuation. It's the good life for all. And here we could say that finding meaning and value in everyday life is what we all want, is what we all are striving after. And here we can differ between co-creators, because we all are co-creators. It's the same as if we would say we cannot not communicate. Even if we are silent, we are communicating something. And that's the same with being a co-creator. Even if we don't do anything, we're still doing something. We're contributing to the whole in what we're doing or not, what we are not doing. But if you are more consciously and more aware of what you're doing, you might become what is called here a co-designer. But here still, you can choose what you want to do. What are your intentions? And the final stage here could be fellow human being, which means that it's in the end about happiness, not only in terms of an egocentric manner, but happiness and well-being for humanity. That, of course, is a quite big goal, and it could be located within normative ethics. And indeed, the development process that the Trilogos method suggests is actually an ethical development process. So we are back at the question where I started with the ancient Greek philosophers and the development towards wisdom, namely the question, what does it mean to become wise? And here being wise can be understood as a state of mind, and here the conference is also called In and Out of Your Mind. So developing towards wisdom as a certain state of mind. And this is, in other words, also the direction of the development process of the Trilogos method, the development of human potential, which in fact could also be understood as a development towards wisdom. Now, I'm almost at the end of my presentation. I also forgot the time completely. I'm sorry for that. But if you could give me 3 more minutes, then I'm handing the word over to Professor Sherman-Weber. So just to finish that, the Trilogos method is an educational approach for personality and consciousness training and development. But as you have seen, it has a lot of psychological and psychotherapeutic implications. There were, in fact, a couple of studies already done on this method, and Professor Sherman-Weber will say more about that, about the empirical studies done by means of a quantitative approach. I would like to share some aspects of a qualitative study that I have carried out last year. It was, in fact, a quite small qualitative research project called the Daimonic Dialogues at a Norwegian folk high school. The Norwegian folk high schools are very strongly focused on what could be called humanities. Their general goal is the promotion of self-formation, which is another expression of personality development, as you could say. At one of these schools, I did for 2 months 7 guided imageries with 15 students at the age of, or they were between 19 and 21 years old. The guided imageries were very short or small imageries that cannot be compared to the longer autodidactical course of the Trilogos method that I was just talking about. Nevertheless, there were 3 trends that came to the fore and that were evaluated by open questionnaires after each session. The students said that due to this intervention process, due to that methodology, they could become more calm and less stressed in general. Then they also performed something what could be called existential learning. That means, how do they deal with change? How can they gain more trust into life and so on? And finally, also gaining self-knowledge in terms of who am I? What are my strengths, my weaknesses? How can I develop my potentials? And here finally some quotes from four participants. One has said about the whole project, I have learned a lot about myself during this project, and it has helped me to become a better version of myself. So here you see similarities to the definition of paideia as I presented it before. Another student said, I feel more ready with things that my inner wants to make me aware of. Besides that, I got enough to work with in the future. So here you see inner growth in the center. Another student said, I got many new experiences and knowledge about myself, which I was not aware of. And finally, I could see personal growth and how to go deeper into myself. And at this point, I would like to stop with my presentation. Jamé, I would like to give you the word. I will stop sharing now. I would like to give you the word to continue in order to have a look at the Trilogos method from a more psychological point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mihai. Half an hour ago when you introduced both of us for this session. So I'm speaking to you from Vienna, from Austria, and it is a great pleasure to have all of you in the audience. I think Michael presented us, introduced us to some theoretical frames and also to some of the methods and of the techniques the Trilogos approach is using to support personal growth, to support effects on personality in this context. Let me first start how I came up to the Trilogos methods. That was more than 15 years ago by now. It was Linda Röttlisberger who got in touch with me from Switzerland through email, probably, and asking me kindly to have a look at her work and what would be the options to check the effectiveness of this Trilogos method. So Linda was very searching to get some feedback on what are main effects of the Trilogos, of the application of the Trilogos methodology in people who are using this, in persons who are using this methodology for personal growth. When I had a look at her, my first look was seeing this equation, PQ, and then the cognitive intelligence, emotional intelligence, and spiritual intelligence. So you had an equation that might an equation that reminds you that there is some basic, I would say, basic mathematical, natural science assumption behind it, how this is composed. So Linda's formula and equation is more a metaphorical formula. And that was the first thing I found out, that this is a model. It is not a real mathematical equation with plus and that equals it. It is just the main compositions of something that leads to the PQ. And when looking at some of the elements, I found out, I realized that some of the elements of the Trilogos methodology are very much linked to what is evident to existential psychology, to existential philosophy tradition, to existential psychotherapy traditions in this context. And there we have other concepts and also theories that are data supported. And on the other hand, it is very much, as Michael said at the end of his talk now, he mentioned the words of happiness, of well-being, and that much of the thinking of Linda Rötlisberger has strong links to what we name positive psychology in the mainstream psychology right now. And in the mainstream psychology, we are looking at areas where we can measure and where we can do big science or hard psychological science, and issues like spirituality, spiritual needs are very often not addressed in academic psychology. I personally think that spiritual needs are basic needs, as other needs are also basic needs, but they are very often not really looked at in empirical psychology, because it is a land of the unknown, of the imprecise and very personal landscape, maybe is a spiritual and the transcendental area out of it. But when you go in modern, in nowadays, positive psychology, you will find also the issue of spirituality included in it, and at least on the theoretical level, and how to assess it, how to measure it, these are still very much open questions. But colleagues and leaders in that area do not deny spirituality as a need anymore. And then I go now back to how mankind, the ways mankind and the approaches mankind uses to come to knowledge, to generate knowledge in general. So this is more a short outlook in epistemology and so on. And in our sciences, we can differentiate a couple of big scientific categories, like the rational and the formal sciences, like mathematics, like logics. And then comes up with the empirical sciences, where we have experiences of it. And here we can see the natural science branch with its very nomothetic approach that tries to define general rules, general laws in it, and tries to explain something. And it uses for this the traditional experiment and the randomized controlled study, for instance. And on the other side, another empirical branch of science would be the humanities, and they are using more an ideographic approach, so that is focused on one element, on one person, on one situation, and analyzing it, and not trying to really to explain it, but more to understand something, and not explaining it and trying to find out which are the variables and which are correlating and how does that function, but just having a look at it and analyzing it. So, and these two approaches from empirical sciences, the nomothetic and the ideographic approach, is something that we use also in psychology. And as I said, the big mainstream academic psychology is more focused on the model of natural sciences, using natural science methods to explain states of our mind. And but also in psychology, you find the ideographic approach analyzing things. And I think if we go on for further advancement in a better knowledge of ourselves, of the human, and of his existential needs, we need a very smart combination of the two knowledge production approaches, the nomothetic as well as the ideographic, and bridging them together and to get in new insights, and not saying the one is hard science and we only do hard science and then we neglect the other things. In some areas in psychology, in clinical psychology, you have situations and experiences which we can experience. For instance, in people with autistic spectrum disorder, you have those with very low functioning cognitive functioning. You find persons who will answer you a question when you ask them, "Can you tell me which day has been the 23rd of April 1966? And just a moment later, they are scrolling their eyes up, they're saying, "Oh, that must have been a Thursday." And then you go in the calendar and see it is a Thursday. And then you can put in a couple of other questions in the direction more in the past or even in the future, and they will always give you the correct answer. And these people doesn't know how to calculate 7 plus 11. So they don't have a mathematical concept in doing this. And when you ask them how they do it, they are saying, "I just know it," but they cannot give you anything more in it. So, and this is a phenomena that is there and which is in our big textbooks not reported, because it does not, it is not in line with our theories we have of the mind of people with autistic spectrum disorder. And then we do not enter it in the books, though the phenomenon exists. So this is an example of how in some areas in psychology, we do not discuss the phenomenon because we don't know and don't have a method how to analyze this and how to enter it in our theoretical modeling inside. And I think using here a more ideographic approach, and also with probably with other advanced observation technologies we have today in neurosciences, we can go on in this direction for getting a better knowledge on these neglected phenomena in our sense. And I think spirituality is very much an analogous thematic approach. So this is to position it why the people and theoretical models like the one of Linda Rodlis-Becker have it hard to be fully accepted in the academic world. What we did in Vienna, and I was really very happy about the Trilogos method that is also has on its first level a program that you can self-administer yourself. You don't need a tutor, you don't need a supervisor or a therapist who is joining you in the session. You have a booklet, very clearly instructions, with instructions in it, and you have a vast majority of exercises in it, and you apply it according to the formulation of the instruction booklet. So it is very independent, and it is self-controlled, and you are self-structured in it. And this is something, and you where you apply it. And this approach, we use it with some master theses in psychology in Vienna, and the students organized reading groups, and people were doing all these exercises, and then we used some outcome measures, and these outcome measures were related very much to the area of positive psychology, of optimism, of sense of coherence, of happiness, and so on, and of quality of life. We used, for instance, WHO quality of the brief WHO quality of life questionnaire, and we could find significant effects after people followed this self-administered course for a couple of weeks in this thing. So people show to be happier, show to have more resilience, and show to express themselves in a better individual quality of life. So that is what we studied in Vienna on this. It is very modest, but it were first approaches that there are positive effects when you apply the Trilogos methodology in it. I personally think that the Trilogos methodology is for personal growth, for our need to get a better understanding of oneself, and to know better one's competencies, one's dreams, one's aims. That is a very important approach. It is not a methodology which you would use if you have a serious mental disorder. It is something for developing, for going on with you when you are in a well-balanced state, and then you go on to improve yourself and to meet your needs of personal growth. And in psychology, in positive psychology, we have in addition the positive psychology was first mentioned by Maslow, the motivational researcher from the United States, who coined that term in 1954, and later on in the late 90s. It was Martin Seligman from the United States who really championed the concept of positive psychology, and a psychology that is the study of positive subjective experience, positive individual traits, and positive institutions, promises to improve quality of life. And positive psychology focuses such on both individual and societal well-being, and that is also an aim in Linda Rüttlisberger's work, not only on the person, him or herself, but also on the environment, on the society, on the groups, and how to set up social responsibility and strengthen social cohesion in it. Let me, before ending, let me give you a brief outline of what is the current state when we go to positive psychology according to Seligman and Christopher Peterson, who came up a couple of years ago only with in their main article named Character, Strengths and Virtues. So they set up a structural organizational model of main 6 virtues and 24 strengths, which all of them together promote positive psychology and strengthen your personality and come up with more happiness at the end. And these 6 virtues would be, the first would be wisdom and knowledge. And in wisdom and knowledge, you will have something like creativity, curiosity, open-mindedness, love of learning, perspective, innovation. The second virtue would be courage, bravery, persistence, integrity, vitality, and these are characterizing courage. The third would be humanity. So that is love towards your people around you, your kindness, your social intelligence. The fourth would be justice. And this goes to citizenship, to social cohesion, to fairness, to leadership. The fifth area of virtue is temperance. So that is like forgiveness and mercy, humility, prudence, and self-control would be grouped in this virtue. And their last virtue is transcendence. And they understand with transcendence the appreciation of beauty and excellence, the gratitude, the hope, humor, and spirituality. So that is the model they have proposed a couple of years ago in this. And I think very much of this is also included in what Linda Rüttlisberger is proposing with the Trilogos methodology and its unique exercises you are doing with. So coming to the end, I want to stress for 2 minutes, I just have to find my notes. I took some notes for this. That to what is positive psychology and the current situation of COVID-19, where people very often experience negative emotions far more than positive emotions. And we know that negative emotions, some of the authors are saying you have to avoid negative emotions. But there is a trend now, and there we come back to also to Viktor Frankl, who says that if there are negative emotions, you can use them in a positive way. And that is a very, very interesting thing. So, and that is something to make hope during the COVID time over here. So in the area of COVID, many people have suffered high levels of stress and mental health problems. And to cope with this widespread of suffering, this may be physical, psychological, social, and even economical suffering, the positive psychology and personal happiness is no longer the sole approach to examine personal well-being. And another approach, that is the one of Viktor Frankl's theory of self-transcendence, provide a promising framework for research and intervention on how to achieve resilience, well-being, and happiness through overcoming suffering and self-transcendence. The existential positive psychology of suffering complements the positive psychology of happiness, which is championed by, as I said, by Martin Seligman and Christopher Peterson, as two equal halves of the circle of well-being and optimal mental health. So the different approaches to positive psychology and their influence on individual well-being during the COVID-19 era is really something we can now examine. We have a global model around and many persons affecting it, and we can collect this, data on this. Psychology from the happiness point, but also from the suffering point, we can look at the dialectic process of overcoming the challenges of every stage of development as necessary for personal growth and self-transcendence. And the role of self-transcendence in resilience and virtue, meaning and happiness can be studied. Third, we can study the upside effects of negative emotions. And the new science of resilience based on cultivating the resilient mindset and character. And the last question would be for research how to make the best use of suffering to achieve out potentials and mental health and the good quality of well-being. So coming to the conclusion, we still have to go on to look for data to explain things, and we still have to go on doing analysis on phenomena to understand these analyses. And this was a major message Karl Jaspers promoted and suggested to us when studying mental health issues and mental disorders, that you cannot explain everything in the context of mental health disorders, but then you have a second approach in understanding them and also understanding the person, the situation of the person that is in front of you, and not only explaining the state of the person of it. I think that is the most important message I have got also from Linda Reutlisberger one more time, that is not only to explain something, but also to analyze and to understand it. So thank you so much for your